the first thing I will tell Joseph is to read the Act, because the Act was, the date of commencement was the publication in the Gazette, and that was 1st November. So once you read the Act, you'll see that it has all the answers to the question that you have asked. Now, the main enforcement arm for this law is what we are. In other countries, it is called the Financial Intelligence Unit. In Uganda, it is called the Financial Intelligence Authority. That is the body that is entrusted with operationalizing the
Has
Act.
it been set up yet?
Not yet.
So,
no, not
the
yet.
body is not even there.
No, of course, these are processes. The law has just been passed. We didn't have it before.
All right.
The law was passed a few months ago. Now, there's supposed to be a board. The board is supposed to be appointed by the Minister of Finance, that is the supervising ministry, with approval of Parliament.
Yes.
Then the board in turn is the minister appoints the executive director of the Financial Intelligence Authority on recommendation of the board, but with approval of Parliament. This is one of the few laws where ministerial appointment is subjected to approval by Parliament, because MPs wanted control in the process of appointing these people, because they want people of high integrity. Now, globally, there's where a forum where FIUs cooperate. It's called the Egmont Group. All countries that have FIUs are encouraged to join Egmont, but of course there are some things you need to have in place. Now, and the reason why FIU is encouraged to join Egmont is that there is cooperation. You assist each other. If Kenya has information, in fact Kenya might discover before we do, Kenya can relay to us through these FIAs. And then, like Robert says, there are mechanisms in the law how this can be done.
But what I really want to understand is, this law was passed by Parliament in August of 2013.
Yes.
The President signed it in October.
Yes.
They gazetted it in November.
That is true.
It's been 4 months.
Yes.
And none of the bodies that the law sets up have been put in place. Are they just going to wait forever because this is supposed to catch corrupt officials?
No. First of all, that's the other thing. This law is the law that is specific to combat corruption. The
yes, true, but like you say, this one is also a tool.
It's one of the tools. Now, like say, Uganda is not operating in isolation. Uganda is a member of SMLAG, the Eastern and Southern Africa Money Laundering Group, and one of the things is that every country is required to have an effective framework, legal framework. Legal framework it goes beyond the law. One, you must have the law in place. You must have the authorities created by the law in place. In this case, the FIA, you must have it in place. The enforcement agencies, in this case, those that will investigate, the police, the IGG, and any other, they must be effective. So it's then how you cooperate. There's also a whole chapter on international cooperation.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's so, and then when you go, because there's a SMLAG has what we call the Council of Ministers. And you asked, how is your legal framework? Do you have the law? Tick. Do you have the FIA? No. If you don't have it, ask why. If, say, you are going to create it, ask you what's the timeline. How soon are you going to put this? So we SMLAG, for example, meets twice a year. There's a meeting in March, April, and then the other one in August, September. So we are having we are going to be, besides being director legal, I'm also a member of the National Task Force that currently represents. It's not as though nothing is being done.
Okay.
Yes, we have what.
So will you have this before August?
No.
You don't know?
Yes, I think we will.
Okay, let's take another question. Yes, madam, you have a question.
Well, this law, I'm just wondering, don't you think you're taking the long route? I mean, the point is someone has stolen money, someone has embezzled funds from the government. Why are you looking at the fact, how he's trying to make it look legal or clean? Deal with the fact that he has stolen. Yes, he's a thief. Charge him, convict him for stealing, not, how he's trying to make it look clean, where he got it from, stuff like that.
All right, let me come to Robert first. What's your response to what Anita has said?
I think, Anita, I take your question in good faith, but I think that there's two things you need to understand. Number one, the anti-money laundering regime does not take away the responsibility of the rest of the criminal liability regime. The Anti-Corruption Act, for instance, the Penal Code Act. What happened was in consolidating the laws on corruption, we moved government moved the provisions from the Penal Code to the Anti-Corruption Act, and there is work now to actually amend the act and make it stronger. Just because they're going under the anti-money laundering regime does not mean they cannot come after you in the anti-corruption scenario. It is likely that a person like Kazinda, if he came out of jail, could actually be subjected to a myriad of other processes under this act. Now, there's another reason, more importantly, why this is critical. You see, understand that there are two things in law. There's guilt, and then there's innocence, and then there's not guilty. A court finding you not guilty doesn't mean you're innocent. You could be found not guilty on a technicality. You still have money. Now, this law would deal with that issue. Yes, you were not guilty of corruption. Why? Someone messed up the evidence. Yes, you are not guilty of corruption. Why? Something went wrong in the trial. When we start to look at the bank details and to follow the money,
there's money you cannot explain.
And there's money you cannot account for. Many years ago, and it's funny, but I'll give you examples from our history. In the late 90s, there were some ministers that were censored. Why? Because two of them came to the floor and they could not explain their wealth. If this law had been in place then, whether or not you charge them with corruption, you could have confiscated those assets. Now, understand that right now, yes, there's a law, and Sydney mentioned this, the Anti-Corruption Act actually, and I think the court has awarded in excess of $4 billion in recovery orders. The problem is they have had an enforcement issue there. But this simplifies a lot of things on evidence gathering. Look at the recent debate we had around oil. Everyone is saying so-and-so took a bribe, so-and-so took a bribe. No one can prove it. Here, the banks will have to keep information for 10 years. Certain information that must be filled in with or without your consent. It doesn't matter anymore. Now, the banks are going to generate this information, meaning that someone sitting at the Financial Intelligence Authority is going to sit down and say, this pattern. Sydney's account usually has $10,000. There's $1 million here. Where did it come from? That alone, whether or not some guy is blowing the whistle on corruption, can trigger an investigation. So I think that it's important to understand the distinction between the usual criminal law framework, especially encapsulated in the IGG Act, the Leadership Code Act, and the Anti-Corruption Act, vis-a-vis this particular act. This will take things much further than we've had them before.
Okay, did this law take into consideration the fact that many Ugandans actually do not bank money? They keep money in their homes, they put it under the beds, in the mattresses. Now, how would a person know that you have more money than you actually should have had?
What the law actually does is it sets a benchmark. That's a tricky question I've had before. The question is, how low do you set the standard? Suspicious transactions, you have two kinds of transactions. You have the unusual transaction and you have the suspicious transaction. I'm a lawyer by profession. Someone walks into my chambers and I'm used to him doing a land deal that is in the range of 10 million. Buy a property from Jomai, flip it 6 months later for 15 million. He walks into my office and says, you know what? I have $1 billion shillings, I'm going to buy a piece of land in Boyogere. What the law tells me to do is to investigate the source of that money. Now, of course, the question was, how do you reach 20 million? There has to be a standard. And I think that Sydney would enlighten us on this since it was on the task force, but my suspicion is they were trying to benchmark. Bank of Uganda sets the minimum, the ceiling for checks at 20 million. You can't set it too low, but you can't set it too high. There will always be a number below which money will go through the system.
Okay.
But the question is, how low do you bring it? If you say 2 million shillings for mobile money, that's another thing. You know, it then means that you're going to have too much paperwork. You understand that you don't want to make it far more complex than it already is for the guys who are going to have to participate in the enforcement of the act, like the banker, the lawyer, and so on and so forth. Because you're telling a bank to inform the intelligence authority of any transaction above a certain threshold or of a certain nature. Now, these can happen in the thousands in a day. If you have information overload, people will pile it up and do nothing about it. So I think that to some extent, yes, there was consideration of the nature of the economy in which we are. As to whether or not it was the most detailed examination you could have, I think that question could remain debatable for quite a long time.
Okay, let's take a break at this point. The debate continues after this break. Continue watching our Parliament.